you want to do that. So it's a little bit quieter downstairs this week. I'm using the microphone as well. Using the microphone, that might make things a little bit better. We'll see. And I have some cappuccino. I've just finished my what's it called? Ciabatta? No, not ciabatta, panini. I have a nice cappuccino and Moby Dick. So last time the crew had spotted some whales. They'd found a pod of sperm whales and they'd launched the boats, and we found there's a new crew of a boat that had been hiding away all this time, but out they came, and yeah, that's pretty much where we left off. Apart from Kikeg's boat, which had been lost in the fog, I think it was. So, chapter 49, The Hyena. There are certain queer times and occasions in this strange and mixed affair we call life, when a man takes this whole universe for a vast practical joke, though the wit thereof he but dimly discerns, and more than suspects that the joke is at nobody's expense but his own. However, nothing dispirits and nothing seems worthwhile disputing. He bolts down all events, all creeds and beliefs and persuasions, all things, all hard things, visible and invisible. Never mind how nobly, as an ostrich of potent digestion gobbles down bullets and gun flints. And as for small difficulties and worryings, prospect of sudden disaster, peril of life and limb, all these, and death itself, seem to him only sly, good-natured hits, and jolly punches in the side bestowed by the unseen and unaccountable old joker. That odd sort of wayward mood I am speaking of comes over a man only in some time of extreme tribulation. It comes in the very midst of his earnestness, so that what just before might have seemed to him a thing most momentous now seems but a part of the general joke. There is nothing like the perils of whaling to breed this free and easy sort of genial desperado philosophy, and with it I now regard this whole voyage of the Pequod and the great white whale its object. Interesting thought, isn't it? All of life is just a joke. And you might think that at moments of great peril. Incidentally, let me know if you're enjoying this or not. Do tell me. You can comment in the comments in YouTube, or you can tell me here on Apps. How are you enjoying it? What do you think? Kikeg, said I, when they had dragged me, the last man, to the deck, and I was still shaking myself in my jacket to fling off the water. Kikeg, my fine friend, does this sort of thing happen often? Without much emotion, though soaked through just like me, he gave me to understand that such things did often happen. Mr. Stubb, said I, turning to that worthy who, buttoned up in his oil jacket, was now calmly smoking his pipe in the rain. Mr. Stubb, I think I have heard you say that of all whalemen you ever met, our chief mate, Mr. Starbuck, is by far the most careful and prudent. I suppose, then, that going plump on a flying whale with your sail set in a foggy squall is the height of a whaleman's discretion. Certain. I've lowered for whales from a leaking ship in a gale off Cape Horn. Mr. Flask, said I, turning to the little king-post, who was standing close by, are you experienced by these things, and I am not? Will you tell me whether it is an unalterable law in this fishery, Mr. Flask, for an oarsman to break his own back, pulling himself back foremost into death's jaws? Can't you twist that smaller? Said Flask. Yes, that's the law. I should like to see a boat's crew backing water to a whale's face foremost. Ha! The whale would give him the squint for squint, mind that. Here, then, from 3 impartial witnesses, I had a deliberate statement of the entire case. Considering, therefore, that squalls and capsizings in the water and consequent bivouacs on the deep were matters of common occurrence in this kind of life, considering that at the superlatively critical instant of going on to the whale I must resign my life into the hands of him who steered the boat, Oftentimes the fellow who at that moment in his impetuousness upon the point of scuttling the craft with his own frantic stampings, considering that particular disaster to our own particular boat was chiefly to be imputed to Starbuck's driving onto his whale almost in the teeth of a squall, and considering, hang on, where am I? And considering that Starbuck, notwithstanding, was famous for his great heedfulness in the fishery, considering that I belonged to this uncommonly prudent Starbuck's boat, and finally, considering in what a devil's chase I was implicated, touching the white whale, taking all things together, I say, I thought I might as well go below and make a rough draft of my will. Keekeg, said I, come along, you shall be my lawyer, executor, and legatee. Thank you, Miramax. I like that paragraph. That's full of full of ironic rage, isn't it? It may seem strange that of all men and sailors should be tinkering at their last wills and testaments, but there are no people in the world more fond of that diversion. This was the fourth time in my nautical life that I had done the same thing. After the ceremony was concluded upon the present occasion, I felt all the easier. A stone was rolled away from my heart. Besides, all the days I should now live would be as good as the days of Lazarus lived after his resurrection, a supplementary clean gain of so many months or weeks as the case may be. I survived my tranquility and content. I survived myself. My death and burial were locked up in my chest. I looked round me, tranquilly and contentedly, like a ghost, a quiet ghost with a clean conscience, sitting inside the bar of a snug family vault. Now then, thought I, unconsciously rolling up my sleeves of my frock, here goes for a cool, collected dive at death and destruction, and the devil fetch the hindmost. Why is that called the hyena? Chapter 49, the hyena, laughing in the face of death, perhaps. Good song. This is Kelly Clarkson, I think. Chapter 50, Ahab's boat and crew, Fadala. So this is the new boat and crew that have just been discovered, just come up out of the hold or wherever they were hiding. The boat Fadala. Who would have thought it, Flask? Cried Stubb. If I had but one leg, you would not catch me in a boat, unless maybe to stop the plug hole with my timber toe. Oh, he's a wonderful old man. I don't think it's so strange after all on that account, hello Mel, said Flask. If his leg were off at the hip, now it would be a different thing. That would disable him, but he has one knee, a good part of the other left, you know. I don't know that, my little man. I never saw him keel. Among the whale-wise people, it has often been argued whether, considering the paramount importance of his life to the success of the voyage, it is right for a whaling captain to jeopardize that life in the active perils of the chase. So Tamerlane's soldiers often argued with tears in their eyes whether that invaluable life of his own, whether that invaluable life of his ought to be carried into the thickest of the fight. That's interesting. Tamerlane. Mel, you might know the story of Tamerlane. I've told it myself at Halloween. I assume it's the same Tamerlane or Tamlin. But that's interesting the reference to Tamerlane. But with Ahab, the question assumed a modified aspect. Considering that with 2 legs, man is but a hobbling wight in times of danger, considering that the pursuit of whales is always under great and extraordinary difficulties, that every individual moment, indeed, then comprises a peril, under these circumstances, is it wise for any maimed man to enter a whaleboat in the hunt? As a general thing, the joint owners of the Pequod must have plainly thought not. It's actually kind of disability positive, this book, isn't it? Ahab well knew that although his friends at home would think little of his entering a boat in a certain comparatively harmless vicissitudes of the chase, for the sake of being near the scene of action and giving his orders in person, yet for Captain Ahab to have a boat actually apportioned to him as a regular headsman in the hunt, above all for Captain Ahab to be supplied with 5 extra men as that same boat's crew, He well knew that such generous conceits never entered the heads of the owners of the Pequod. Therefore, he had not solicited a boat's crew from them, nor had he in any way hinted his desires on that head. Nevertheless, he had taken private measures of his own touching all that matter. Until Caboco's published discovery, the sailors had little foreseen it, though to be sure when, after being a little while out of port, all hands had concluded the customary business of fitting the whaleboats for service, when some time after this Ahab was now and then found bestirring himself in the matter of making thole pins, not sure what a thole pin is, with his own hands for what was thought to be one of the spare boats, and even solicitously cutting the small wooden skewers which, when the line is running out, and are pinned over the groove in the bow. When all this was observed in him, and particularly his solicitude in having an extra coat of sheathing in the bottom of the boat, as if to make it better withstand the pointed pressure of his ivory limb, and also the anxiety evinced in exactly shaping the thigh-board or clumsy cleat, as it is sometimes called, the horizontal piece in the boat's bow for bracing the knee against in darting or stabbing at the whale. When it was observed how often he stood up in that boat with his solitary knee fixed in the semicircular depression in the cleat, and with the carpenter's chisel gouged out a little here and straightened it a little there, all these things, I say, had awakened much interest and curiosity at the time, but almost everybody supposed that this particular preparative heedfulness in Ahab must only be with a view of the ultimate chase of Moby Dick, for he had already revealed his intention to hunt that mortal monster in person. But such a supposition did by no means involve the remotest suspicion as to the boat's crew being assigned to any of the boat's crew being assigned to that boat. Now, with the subordinate phantoms, what wonder remained soon waned away, for in the whaler wonders soon wane. Besides, now and then some unaccountable odds and ends of strange notions came up from the unknown nooks and ash holes of the earth to mend these floating outlaws of whalers, and the ships themselves often pick up such queer castaway creatures found tossing about in the open sea on planks, bits of wreck, oars, whaleboats, canoes, blown off Japanese junks and whatnot, that Beelzebub himself might climb up up the side and step down into the cabin to chat with the captain, and it would not create any unsubduable excitement in the forecastle. That's a good word, unsubduable. But, be all this as it may, certain it is that while the subordinate phantoms soon found their place among the crew, though still as it were somehow distinct from them, yet that hair-turbaned Fedallah remained a muffled mystery to the last. Whence he came in a mannerly world like this, by what sort of unaccountable tie he soon evinced himself to be linked with Ahab's peculiar fortunes, nay, so far as to have some sort of half-hinted influence, heaven knows, but it might have been even authority over him. All this none knew, but one cannot sustain an indifferent air concerning Fedallah. He was such a creature as civilized domestic people in the temperate zone only see in their dreams, and that but dimly, but the likes of whom now and then glide among the unchanging Asiatic communities, especially the Oriental Isles to the east of the continent, those insulated, immemorial, unalterable countries which even in these modern days still preserve much of the ghostly aboriginalness of Earth's primal generations, when the memory of the first man was as distinct a recollection, and all men his descendants, unknowing whence he came, eyed each other as real phantoms, and asked of the sun and the moon why they were created and to what end. When, though, according to Genesis, the angels indeed consorted with the daughters of men, the devils also, and the uncanonical rabbis, indulged in mundane amours. Think we'll have another chapter? Chapter 51, The Spirit Spout. Lovely. The Spirit Spout. Days, weeks passed, and under easy sail the Ivory Pequod had slowly swept across 4 several cruising grounds, that off the Azores, off the Cape de Verdes, on the Plate, so-called, being off the mouth of the Rio de la Plata, and the Carroll Ground, an unstaked watery locality southerly from St. Helena. It was while gliding through these latter waters that one serene and moonlit night, when all the waves rolled by like scrolls of silver and by their soft suffusing seethings made what seemed a silvery silence nor a solitude, on such a silent night a silvery jet was seen far in advance of the white bubbles at the bow. What alliteration that is! That's terrific. Scrolls of silver, soft suffusing seethings, silvery silence, not a solitude. On such a night, such a silvery jet was seen. That's beautiful, isn't it? Lit up by the moon, it looked celestial. Some even plumed and glittered God uprising from the sea. Vidala first described this jet. For of those moonlight nights, it was his wont to mount the main masthead and stand a lookout there, with the same precision as if it had been day. Something's funny. And yet, though herds of whales were seen by night, not one whaleman in 100 would venture a lowering for them. You may think with what emotions, then, the seamen beheld this old oriental perched aloft at such unusual hours, his turban and the moon companions in one sky. But when, after spending his uniform interval there for several successive nights without uttering a single sound, when after all this silence his unearthly voice was heard announcing that silvery moonlit jet, every reclining mariner started to his feet as if some winged spirit had lighted in the rigging, and hailing the mortal crew, "There she blows!" Had the trump of judgment blown, they could not have quivered more. Yet still they felt no terror, rather pleasure. For though it was a most unwonted hour, yet so impressive was the cry and so deliriously exciting that almost every soul on board instinctively desired a lowering. I assume they mean lowering the boats off the ship, to go whaling. Walking the deck with quick side-lunging strides, Ahab commanded gallant sails and royals to be set, and every stunsail spread. The best man in the ship must take the helm. Then, with every masthead manned, the piled-up craft rolled down before the wind. The strange upheaving, lifting tendency of the taffrail breeze lifting the hollows of so many sails made the buoyant, hovering deck to feel like air beneath his feet. The feet. Hang on, lost my place. The feet, while she still rushed along, as if two antagonistic influences were struggling in her, one to mount direct to heaven, the other to drive yawingly to some horizontal goal. And had you watched Ahab's face that night, you would have thought that in him two different things were warring. While his one live leg made lively echoes along the deck, every stroke of his dead limb sounded like a coffin trap. On life and death this old man walked. But though the ship was swiftly spread, and though from every eye like arrows the eager glances shot, yet the silvery jet was no more seen than that night. Every sailor swore he saw it once, but not a second time. This midnight spout had almost grown a forgotten thing, when some days after, lo, at the same silent hour it was again announced. Again it was descried by all, but upon making sail to overtake it, once more it disappeared as if it had never been seen. And so it served us night after night, till no one heeded it but to wonder at it. Mysteriously jetted into the clear moonlight or starlight, as the case may be, or maybe disappearing again for one whole day or 2 days or 3, and somehow seeming at every distinct repetition to be advancing still farther and farther out in vain. Out in our van, so ahead of us. This solitary jet seemed forever alluring us on. Nor with the immemorial superstition of their race, and in accordance with their preternaturalness, as it seemed, which in many things invested the Pequod, there were wanting some of the seamen who swore that whenever and wherever descried, at however remote times or in however far apart latitudes and longitudes, that unbearable spout was cast by one same self whale, by that whale, Moby Dick. For a time there reigned, too, a sense of peculiar dread at this flitting apparition, as if it were treacherously beckoning us on, in order that the monster might turn round upon us and rend at us at last in the remotest and most savage seas. Do we believe that it might? Is that what's going to happen? These temporary apprehensions, so vague but so awful, derived a wondrous potency from the contrasting serenity of the weather, in which, beneath all its blue blandness, some thought there lurked a devilish charm, as for days and days we voyaged alone, through seas so wearily, lonesomely mild, that all space in repugnance to our vengeful errand seemed vacating itself of life before our urn-like prow. But at last, when turning to the eastward, the Cape winds began howling around us, and we rose and fell upon the long, troubled seas that are there, when the ivory-tusked Pequod sharply bowed to the blast and gored the dark waves in her madness, till, like showers of silver chips, the foam flakes flew on her bulwarks. Then all this desolate vacuity of life went away, but gave place to sights more dismal than before. What could they be? Close to our bows, strange forms in the water darted hither and thither before us, while thick in our rear flew the inscrutable sea ravens. And every morning, perched on our stays, rows of these birds were seen, and in spite of our hootings, for a long time obstinately clung to the hemp, as though they deemed our ship some drifting, uninhabited craft, a thing appointed to desolation, and therefore a fit roosting place for their homeless selves. And heaved, still unrestingly heaved the black sea, as if its vast tides were a conscience, and that great mundane soul were in anguish and remorse for the long sin and suffering it had bred. Cape of Good Hope do they call ye, rather Cape Tormentoso, as called of yore. For long allured by their perfidious silences that before had attended us, we found ourselves launched into this tormented sea, where guilty beings transformed into those fowls and these fish seemed condemned to swim on everlastingly without any heaven in store, or beat that black air without any horizon. But calm, snow-white and unvarying, still directing its fountain of feathers to the sky, still beckoning us on from before, that solitary jet would at times be descried. During all this blackness of the elements, Ahab, though assuming for the time that almost continuing command of the drenched and dangerous deck, manifested the gloomiest reserve, and more seldom than ever addressed his mates. In tempestuous times like these, after everything above and aloft had been secured, nothing more can be done but passively to await the issue of the gale. The captain and crew became practical fatalists. So with his ivory leg inserted into its accustomed hole, and with one hand firmly grasping a shroud, Ahab for hours and hours would stand gazing to windward, while the occasional squall of sleet or snow would all but congeal his very eyelashes together. Meantime, the crew, driven from the forward port of the ship by the perilous seas that burstingly broke over its bows, stood in a line along the bulwarks in the waist. And the better to guard against the leaping waves, each man had slipped into a sort of bowline secured to the rail, in which he swung as a loosened belt. Few or no words were spoken, and the silent ship, as if manned by painted sailors in wax, day after day tore on through all the swift madness and gladness of the demoniac waves. By night, the same muteness of humanity before the shrieks of the ocean prevailed. Still in silence the men swung in the bowlines. Still wordless Ahab stood up to the blast. Even when wearied nature seemed demanding repose, he would not seek that repose in his hammock. Never could Starbuck forget the old man's aspect when one night, going down into the cabin to mark how the barometer stood, he saw him with closed eyes sitting straight in his floor-screwed chair. The rain and half-melted sleet of the storm from which he had some time before emerged, still slowly dripping from the unremoved hat and coat. On the table beside him lay unrolled one of those charts of tide and currents which have previously been spoken of. His lantern swung from his tightly clenched hand. Though the body was erect, the head was thrown back so that the closed eyes were pointed towards the needle of the telltale that swung from a beam in the ceiling. Terrible old man, thought Starbuck with a shudder, sleeping in this gale, still thou steadfastly eyest the purpose. End of chapter. So we have one more? One last one? Just a couple of pages. One last chapter. This is the Macarena again. Nearly finished my coffee. Chapter 52, the Albatross. Albatross. Southeastward, from the cape of the distant Crozettes, a good cruising ground for right whalemen, a sail loomed ahead, the Gonny Albatross by name, as she slowly drew nigh. From my lofty perch at the foremast head, I had a good view of that sight so remarkable to a tyro in the ocean fisheries, a whaler at sea, and long absent from home. As if the waves had been fullers, this craft was bleached like the skeleton of a stranded walrus. All down her sides this spectral appearance was traced with long channels of reddened rust, while all her spars and her rigging were like the thick branches of trees furred over with hoarfrost. Only her lower sails were set. A wild sight as it was to see her long-bearded lookouts at those three mastheads. They seemed clad in the skins of beasts, so torn and unpatched the raiment that had survived nearly 4 years of cruising. Standing in iron hoops nailed to the masts, they swayed and swung over a fathomless sea. And though when the ship slowly glided close under our stern, we 6 men in the air came so nigh to each other that we might almost have leapt from mastheads of one ship to the other. Yet those forlorn-looking fishermen, mildly eyeing us as they passed, said not one word to our own lookouts, while the quarterdeck hail was being heard from below. "Ship ahoy! Have you seen the white whale?" But as the strange captain, leaning over the pallid bulwarks, was in the act of putting his trumpet to his mouth, as if somehow fell from his hand into the sea, and the wind now rising amain, he in vain strove to make himself heard without it. Meantime, his ship was still increasing the distance between. While in various silent ways the seamen of the Pequod were evinced their observance of this ominous incident as the mere mention of the white whale's names from one ship to another, Ahab for a moment paused, as if seemed as though he would have lowered a boat to board the stranger had not the threatening wind forbade. But taking advantage of his windward position, he again seized the trumpet, and knowing by her aspect that the stranger vessel was a Nantucketer, and shortly bound for home, he loudly hailed, "Ahoy there! This is the Pequod, bound round the world. Tell them to address all future letters to the Pacific Ocean, and this time 3 years, if I am not at home, tell them to address them to..." At this moment, the 2 wakes were fairly crossed, and instantly then, in accordance with their singular ways, the shoals of small, harmless fish, for that some days before had been placidly swimming by our side, darted away with what seemed shuddering fins, and ranged themselves fore and aft with the stranger's flanks. Though in the course of the continual voyagings, Ahab must often before have noticed a similar sight, yet to any monomaniac man the various trifles capriciously carry meanings. "Swim away from me, do ye?" muttered Ahab, gazing over into the water. There seemed but little in the words, but the tone conveyed more of deep, helpless sadness than the insane old man had before ever evinced. But turning to the steersman, who thus far had been holding the ship in the wind to diminish her headway, he cried out in his old lion voice, "Up helm! Keep her off round the world!" Round the world! There is much in that sound to inspire proud feelings, but whereto does all that circumnavigation conduct? Only through numberless perils in the very point whence we started, where those we were left behind secure were all that time before us. Were this world an endless plain, and by sailing eastward we could forever reach new distances and discover sights more sweet and strange than any Cyclades or islands of King Solomon, then there were promise in the voyage. But in pursuit of those mysterious mysteries we dream of, or in tormented chase of that demon phantom that some time or other swims before all human hearts, while chasing such over this round globe, they either lead us on in barren mazes, or midway lead us whelmed. Unusual to read the word whelmed rather than overwhelmed. But there we go. A good few chapters. Interesting, exciting. Getting lit from below by the sun reflecting on the floor. I hear PJ and Duncan. So there we go. As I say, let me know what you think, either in the comments on YouTube or here on Haps, you can make a comment in the broadcast, even after it's finished. You can comment there if you want to. Yeah, or as I say, on YouTube, and you can watch all the previous chapters on YouTube, and there's a couple of other books there as well you might enjoy, like Treasure Island. That was a very good book that I enjoyed, or Frankenstein. That was a good one too. So yeah, you can watch those there. You can easily find them on my YouTube page. Make sure you follow me there, in fact. Right, I'll see you again next week, next Thursday afternoon, for the next chapter. What were we on? Chapter 53, The Gam. So I'll see you for that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your comments, and I'll see you next week in here. But I've also got maybe the phone box tonight, and I'll be at Dryborough Abbey on Saturday afternoon. So look forward to that. See you all later. Thanks for watching. Cheery bye, everyone. Have a nice Thursday, or whatever it is. Bye-bye.